Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjanam. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjanam. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjanam. Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjanam. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahans Parvaraj Akacharya Ashtodhara Shishram Divine Grace Abai Charanaravinda Bhakti Vedanta Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai ISKCON Sansthapak Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Ora Premanandi, all glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. Do I get a Bhagavatam? Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So this morning we are studying from the Srimad Bhagavatam. We've chosen a particular verse to explore as part of this new series of Scientific Saturdays. This particular verse is from the second canto and the second chapter, which is entitled The Lord in the Heart. And we're studying text 35. Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshata Svatmanana Hari Lakshata Svatmana Hari Drishyayar Buddhi Adibir Drashta Drishyayar Buddhyadibir Drashta Lakshanayar Anumapakai Lakshanayar Anumapakai Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshata Svatmana Hari Drishyar Buddhyadibir Drashta Lakshanayar Anumapakai Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshata Svatmana Hari Drishyar Buddhyadibir Drashta Lakshanayar Anumapakai.
Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu
Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu
Lakshita Svatmana Harihi
Lakshita Svatmana Hari
Drishyar Buddhyadibir Drashta
Drishyar Buddhyadibir Drashtam
Lakshanayar Anumapakai
Lakshanayar Anumapakai. Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu
Lakshita Svatmana Hari
Lakshana Svatmana Hari Drishyar Drashtam Lakshanayar Anumapakai. Ladies? Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshana Svatmana Hari Drisha Buddhyadibir Drashta Lakshanayar Anumapakai. Bhagavan Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshita Svatmana Hari Drishyar Buddhyadibir Drashta Lakshanayar Anumapakai. Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead. Sarva, all. Bhuteshu, in the living entities. Lakshitaha is visible. Sva-atmana, along with the self. Hari, the Lord. Drishyai, by what is seen. Buddhi adibi, by intelligence. Drashta, one who sees. Lakshanai, by different signs. Anumapakai, by hypothesis. Translation. The personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, is in every living being along with the individual soul. And this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. Please repeat. The personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, is in every living being, along with the individual soul. And this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. This is a long purport, but it's an important one because it sets the scene for the use of analysis and logic and direct perception in coming to understand the truths of Krishna consciousness. So I wanted to focus on this because it also gives us our introduction to how we can begin to meditate on the wonder and the nature of consciousness for ourselves. And also within this there is ideas and a program for how you can discuss consciousness and existence with other people. So this is quite it's a very different type of purport that Prabhupada is giving here. It's very analytical. So, Srila Prabhupada's purport. The general argument of the common man is that since the Lord is not visible to our eyes, how can one either surrender unto him or render transcendental loving service unto him? To such a common man, here is a practical suggestion given by Srila Shukadev Goswami as to how one can perceive the Supreme Lord by reason and perception. Actually, the Lord is not perceivable by our present materialized senses, but when one is convinced of the presence of the Lord by a practical service attitude, there is a revelation by the Lord's mercy. And such a pure devotee of the Lord can perceive the Lord's presence always and everywhere. He can perceive that intelligence is the form, direction of the Paramatma plenary portion of the personality of Godhead. I'm going to repeat that. He can perceive that intelligence is the form, direction of the Paramatma plenary portion of the personality of Godhead. The presence of Paramatma in everyone's company is not very difficult to realize, even for the common man. The procedure is as follows. One can perceive one's self-identification and feel positively that he exists. We shall come back to that one. One can perceive one's self-identification and feel positively that he exists. He may not feel it very abruptly, but by using a little intelligence, he can feel that he is not the body. He can feel that the hand, the leg, the head, the hair, and the limbs are all his bodily parts and parcels, but as such, the hand, the leg, the head, etc., cannot be identified with his self. Therefore, just by using intelligence, he can distinguish and separate his self from other things that he sees. So the natural conclusion is that the living being, either man or beast, is the seer, and he sees besides himself all other things. So the natural conclusion is that the living being, either man or beast, is the seer, and he sees beside himself all other things. So there is a difference between the seer and the seen. Now, by a little use of intelligence, we can also readily agree that the living being who sees the things beyond himself by ordinary vision has no power to see or to move independently. All our ordinary actions and perceptions depend on various forms of energy supplied to us by nature in various combinations. Our senses of perception and of action, that is to say, our 5 perceptive senses of 1, hearing, 2, touch, 3, sight, 4, taste, and 5, smell, as well as our 5 senses of action, namely 1, hands, 2, legs, 3, speech, 4, evacuation organs, and 5, reproductive organs, and also our 3 subtle senses, namely 1, mind, 2, intelligence, and 3, ego. 13 senses in all, are supplied to us by various arrangements of gross or subtle forms of natural energy. And it is equally evident that our objects of perception are nothing but the products of the inexhaustible permutations and combinations of the forms taken by material energy. As this conclusively proves that the ordinary living being has no independent power of perception or of motion, and as we undoubtedly feel our existence being conditioned by nature's energy, we conclude that he who sees is spirit, and that the senses, as well as the objects of perception, are material. The spiritual quality of the seer is manifest in our dissatisfaction with the limited state of material conditioned existence. This is the difference between spirit and matter. There are some less intelligent arguments that matter develops the power of seeing and moving as a certain organic development. But such an argument cannot be accepted because there is no experimental evidence that matter has anywhere produced a living entity. Trust no future, however pleasant. Idle talks regarding future development of matter into spirit are actually foolish, because no matter has ever developed the power of seeing or moving in any part of the world. Therefore, it is definite that matter and spirit are two different identities. And this conclusion is arrived at by the use of intelligence. That's half the purport. The rest of the purport takes a different direction in our relationship with Paramatma, which is very, very important. But I would like to focus on this first half, if that's all right, today. We will probably come back to revisit the rest of the purport. But there's an awful lot to take in here. All right? What Prabhupada is actually doing, he's summarizing arguments used by Jiva Goswami in the Tattva Sandarbha. In text 53-54 of the Tattva Sandarbha, Jiva Goswami lays out 4 particular principles that can be observed. And it is part of Jiva Goswami's argument trying to help us understand the relationship of Jiva with the Paramatma. However, in both cases, they start by ourselves as the Jiva trying to understand who we are. Because until we understand we are spirit, then it's not much point us trying to understand the Supreme Spirit. So the first step is to use our intelligence. And this idea of, where it mentions here, drishya, by what is seen. You know, that again picks up the verse in the Gita 9.2, where Krishna is saying this is direct perception, pratyaksha agamam, that this can be directly perceived. Buddhi adibir means that you're using your internal cognitive senses, the buddhi and mana, to really understand things. And we're understanding it both by lakshana, which is the different characteristics of things. So that is what you analyze with your intelligence. You analyze the characteristics of things. And from that, anumapakai, they can be hypotheses. And therefore you come to a conclusion of who you are and what you are and how you relate to a source that can explain all of this existence to you. That is actually the challenge for the human being. To really understand the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And to delve into that in such a way that we understand what is the source of, what could be the source of everything that exists in this way. So this is why it also serves very nicely for our first exploration on scientific Saturdays into consciousness, the nature of who we are. Consciousness is a very tricky subject. As you know, one famous neuroscientist, philosopher in Britain said, it's a mystery in our faces at every moment. Because we're conscious. We're aware we're conscious. But it's a mystery what it is, where it comes from. Really, it's only a mystery because they're trying to explain it in terms of the brain. Otherwise, it's not a mystery. It's actually the thing you know most. You know nothing more surely than the fact of your own consciousness. So why is that a mystery? Everything else should be a mystery, because everything else is not you. Everything else is you have to find out about. But consciousness is the one thing you know. And Prabhupada picks up on that, and I repeated at the beginning. One can perceive one's self-identification and feel positively that he exists. And this is coming from, again, Jiva Goswami. And this predates the famous Western philosopher, René Descartes. came about 100 years or so after Jiva Goswami was writing. And Descartes is famous for his analysis, and it's probably the only good thing he did. I'll explain how he messed up after that. But the good thing that he did was he posed the question, what can I know for certain? What can I know for certain? And he analysed that, well, we can't trust our senses because they kind of fool us all the time. I see something far away and I think it's small, but actually it could be closer and bigger. I get confused about things. My mind plays tricks on me at night. My dreams are just completely crazy. Can't trust any of those. So what can I trust that I can know absolutely for certain? And in one sense, he is pointing out the difficulty with the ascending process of gaining knowledge, which is, I suppose, the disease of modern civilization, that we think we'll get perfect knowledge by an ascending process, which relies on sense perception and relies on mental hypothesis. But if those two things can fool us at any stage, how do we find perfect knowledge? Well, the scientific method tries to do that by building in, I suppose, what it considers to be checks and balances against these frailties of empirical observation and speculation. But it's still, even if you manage to get rid of most of the frailties, others will remain, and even then it becomes limited. It is limited. Because that which you will perceive outside is always something different to you. And the question is, how will you ever discover what you are as the person observing? And again, this is our difficulty with modern science, that it involves itself with objective analysis, meaning I'm trying to analyze everything else around me and I'm coming up with wonderful theories how different things work. But have I got a theory for how I work as the observer to all this? How I am able to experience these things? What is it that makes me the seer? What is it that makes me feel I exist? Where's that coming from? Because I'm not just receiving data, I am feeling it. I'm experiencing it as the knower. The Gya, in the Kshetra Gya, that's from the Gita. I am the knower of the field. So, this is the difficulty that modern science, when it kind of looks at all the things outside, the body, the brain, everything that's going on, it cannot find the thing that makes us the seer. It cannot find consciousness. Just isn't there. And then when we try and talk about, well, actually we are the entity that is the conscious being. And then say, well, where's that? How do I see that? Well, you can. And that's what this process is about. So Descartes kind of came up with this idea that I can't trust my senses, I can't trust my mind. However, what I can know for certain is that I am the one doing the thinking. Right? My thoughts may be stupid. They may be totally wrong. They may be illusions. So I can't trust my actual thoughts, but I can trust the understanding that I am the thing that's doing the thinking. That was his thing, Je pense donc je suis. Or in Latin, as it is, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Now, this isn't actually very deep compared to the analysis that we get in the Vedas. and from the different sages. It really isn't that deep. But it was impressive for Western philosophy. And it still poses a challenge. The difficulty, and I'll mention now since we brought him up, is that Descartes went off in various directions trying to... he was actually trying to prove God through, logic. And he probably overstepped his abilities in that regard and came up with a few ideas that have caused trouble when it comes to discussing consciousness, even to the modern day. He created a kind of very dualistic notion, which, because people can't think, well, if there's spirit and matter, and this is a subject we will come to on another occasion, but I just highlighted now, that if you've got spirit and matter, and if they're two different things, how do they connect? How do they interact? That doesn't work. So people, this it is typical of the physicalist to say, "Oh, you're just a dualist," and we know that's wrong. That's the problem. So that is one little hump that Descartes has created for the preachers of Krishna consciousness. And we will explore different ways to get over that in due course. But we're back to consciousness. We've come to this point that by understanding self-identification, wait, I am the thing doing the thinking. I know I exist. And it's a good point to start a conversation with anyone. Do you exist? I'll put it to the room here. Do you exist? Yes. Good. Whew. And awake. So, some people will say, no, I don't exist. You've met them, haven't you? No? Some people interpret Buddhist philosophy in that way. That actually, no, we don't exist. Now what, huh? It's just illusion. It's just illusion, yes. Exactly. So, the problem with that is, one, is not exactly what the Buddha actually said. That's a later imposition on the Buddhist philosophy. And secondly, even if you think that the ultimate state of your being will be shunyavad, nothingness, and you will not exist, at the moment you think you exist, don't you? Yeah. That's why you're following Buddhism, because at the moment you think you exist. So, either way, you answer yes. You do think you exist. There is another syndrome that sometimes people mention called Cotard's syndrome. This is a nasty kind of psychological state where people actually believe they're dead. They're absolutely convinced that this body is just decaying, it's just disintegrating because they're dead. And they feel no connection with the body or the world. It's a really weird, dissociative state. And they think, I don't exist, Now, the interesting thing is, even that establishes that they believe they exist. Because they have to, when they report it to the doctor or the therapist, they will say, I believe I do not exist. So you can see the contradiction in that, right? That actually you are recognizing you are the I, the individual seer, the individual experiencer, the individual knower, who might think, I don't exist. So that's a good example of Descartes' mind fooling you. But it still holds that you are the thinking thing inside there, thinking you don't think or exist. The material energy can really mess us up, in various ways. So, Jiva Goswami comes up with with four kind of important aspects that he is trying to work on. And it all builds on this idea of using our conscious ability to understand who we are as the seer and understand what is seen and why there is a difference. And actually this is picked up in a couple of verses that Prahlad Maharaj mentions to his classmates when he's describing what Narad Muni told him when he was in the womb. And there's two verses. He says, there are two kinds of bodies for every individual soul. A gross body made of 5 gross elements and a subtle body made of 3 subtle elements. Within these bodies, however, is the spirit soul. One must find the soul by analysis, saying, neti, neti. This is not. This is not. Thus, one must separate spirit from matter. And then he says, sober and expert persons should search for the spirit soul with minds purified through analytical study in terms of the soul's connection with and distinction from all things that undergo creation, maintenance, and destruction. And this is where Jiva Goswami starts. He says we have to explore this aspect of what are the things that are created, that change, that come into being, that stay for a while and then disintegrate. Have a look around. Look at all those things. You're the observer of them. You are not them. You are the seer. These are the seen. And so the idea is that even the mind is going through changes. People might think consciousness is not constant, because one of the big problems that we have in discussing consciousness with philosophers and people who have explored this topic is the conflation between consciousness and the mind. And this will be something we will have to go into in a lot more detail another time. But there is big conflation, and Descartes is responsible for that one as well, because, you know, was it mens rea and externa rea, whatever it was, or cognitans, you know, that which is the cognitive stuff, mind, and that which is the external world. So mind and matter, that's why they say it's duality. They're not really, and they're just kind of putting that consciousness is in there, in the mind box. Now, what they mean by that, and the interpretation that comes from it, is that consciousness is the stuff you experience. And again, we have to be a little careful here, because there are two ways of using this word consciousness. And we have consciousness, of course, in our organization title, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So the two ways of using consciousness are as the content of our experiences, the things that we are aware of. And you could say, well, that's how Prabhupada was using that in the title of ISKCON, that we want to become conscious of Krishna, aware of Krishna, absorbed in thought of Krishna, right? So consciousness, in that sense, is the content of our awareness. But we also use consciousness as a thing in itself, the source of our ability to be aware. The source of, and it's often that we use this word phenomenon, the source of this phenomenon of experience. So what is that which makes us able to experience things, to be aware, to exist? And that's when we are trying to link consciousness with its source in the Atma, the soul, or the source in Krishna. So actually another way of thinking of International Society for Krishna Consciousness is not just that we are meant to become conscious of Krishna, but that we want to explore the world that is Krishna's consciousness. Because from Krishna's consciousness, everything else exists. And we are just one little fragment of Krishna's consciousness as a separated little living entity. So we have to appreciate that people will use these two terms in different ways. The Buddhists and the materialists like to think of consciousness solely in terms of the stuff we experience. And then they'll say, and that changes, doesn't it? At every moment, what you're experiencing is changing. How you're feeling in that experience is changing. Therefore, consciousness keeps changing. It's not a permanent thing, isn't it? Good argument? What would we say in response to that?
It's the impression that's changing, not this consciousness itself.
Exactly, and that's exactly what Jiva Goswami tells us to say. That, yeah, the stuff that you're experiencing will go through changes. But the fact and the ability of you being able to experience that hasn't changed. That's the point that has to be made. And you can't have one without the other. That you are not, because there is a continuity of the I between one moment and the next. I was experiencing thoughts in my mind like this. I was perhaps feeling like that. Now I'm experiencing other thoughts. I'm feeling like this. And I keep changing. But there is an I that is constant when this conveyor belt of life passes in front of us. So that's why we have to distinguish that when we're talking about consciousness, we are talking about the ability to be able to be aware, to perceive, to experience, to think. Not just the stuff of what we think or feel or experience. Separate the ability from the content. They're linked, of course they're linked. But the real interesting bit is the bit that doesn't change. And that becomes the big mystery. So what Jiva Goswami kind of works on is to really kind of build on this. And then the next thing is to really understand the difference between, in order to kind of highlight this, you have to understand the difference between the observer and the observed. And there are different kind of contemplation exercises that people can do on this one. And they're linked with a thing called higher order thinking. For instance, when we are just spacing out, our mind's just, we're not putting any direction or concentration on it. The thoughts just float through the mind, don't they? Right? And you're just watching them kind of go, and then this idea comes, and then this follows, and this links in with this. This is called associative thinking. Just kind of just flows. Doesn't require any effort. And you can just watch it. So that's thinking. You're thinking. There's a type of thinking there. Now, what the next step is to recognize that actually these are thoughts that I am thinking. Not just to let the thoughts happen to you, but to actually think I am having thoughts. And one little exercise which I sometimes do with people is I kind of give them something to kind of space out on. I say, if you could be anywhere at this moment, where would it be? Just let your mind kind of go on that one. And then, after a moment ask, now could you go back to those thoughts? Think about which thoughts you had. Can you remember the order of them? Can you put them that you had this and then that one led onto this one, and then so now you're thinking about your thoughts, you see? So that's a higher stage than just thinking. You're thinking about thoughts. Now, after doing that, realize that you are the entity that is trying to organize and think about yourself as the thinker of the thoughts. So a third step, you can just be thinking. You can be thinking about, oh, yeah, I thought that, and then I thought that, yeah. Oh, now I understand. I'm the thinker of those thoughts. You see? Higher order states. And that again is a sort of useful meditation to help us appreciate that I, as the observer, am indifferent to the stuff that I observe in my mind. So, and Prabhupada plays on this one, the observer, and he uses something which I'm sure I've heard many devotees use. He says that, this helps us understand that even in relationship to my body, that there is distinction. Because I say, my leg, my hand, my head. I don't say, I leg, or I hand, or I head. I recognize that these are things, again, I'm observing. Now, the nature of material conditioning is so strong. We were looking at a verse from the Yoga Sutra a week ago, which talks about this inherent Shakti of the material energy to bind the consciousness of the Jiva, the Purusha, to the concept of matter. There's a natural energy that's conflating that. This is Maya's potency of bewildering us. That's natural. So we kind of think, yeah, me leg, me hand. But actually, it's only through a purified approach of our intelligence that we start to realize, no, wait a minute. This thing's skin and bones and, flesh. And I'm observing it. I'm aware of it, But that goes through changes. That's not me. This ain't me. Even my mind ain't me. It's what I'm aware of. It's what I'm observing. So this is helping us to appreciate the difference between the observer and the observed. And again, using that meditation example to appreciate that consciousness is the witness of objects. Another good way of thinking about this is Jiva Goswami's third point, that consciousness can be seen as the witness of the actions of our body and the thoughts of our mind. We are the... so in that way, the witness is distinct. And there's a little argument that sometimes we have to bring up, because people say, well, okay, but consciousness can be extinguished. Like in deep sleep. You've got no consciousness, do you? There. How can you say consciousness is permanent when in sleep, dreaming, okay, we can, you're consciously aware of dreams, but that's only part of your sleep. Most of it is deep sleep, nothing. Is it nothing? Jiva Goswami, and this is a standard thing that actually comes out of the Vedanta Sutra. The Vedanta Sutra states it, Jiva repeats it, Baladev Pajamusan repeats it, Prabhupada repeats it, that no. Even when there's deep sleep, we wake up, we're still the same person we were before, right? So that continuity, it's not that after deep sleep, I wake up and go, whew, brand new me, all right, never mind what that guy was up to yesterday, I'm now in charge. Here's what, all right, what do I do? Now we know it's the same me as yesterday, right? And of course our whole society is organized on that basis, because if to get out of a crime, all I had to do was to go to sleep and wake up. You don't know what that other guy. Yeah. What a criminal, you know. But he's gone. He's not, you know. So I'm now here. Obviously, we know that there's continuity of the I, and actually, even in the state of sleep, deep sleep, what it said is, okay, your senses are shut down, the mind is shut down by the intelligence, and therefore, what the soul is experiencing is nothing. It's not that it's not experiencing anything, it's experiencing nothing. Difference. Meaning that when you wake up, you have this sense, I slept happily. I don't have anything I can recall from it, but I slept happily. I have a memory even of being in a state where there was nothing going on. So even then, consciousness persists. So, and then there's a fourth thing that Jiva Goswami mentions, and that is you should meditate on the incompatibility that we go through suffering compared to what we want and compared to Krishna, who is the supreme reservoir of all pleasure. That makes a clear difference between the Jiva and the Paramatma. That Krishna is blissful, we aren't. But it's also helpful to us. And from these, we kind of come up with a little definition. And I'm aware that actually time has moved on a little bit. So I'm just going to run through these. This analysis that Prabhupada and Jiva Goswami have given us, give us a few points that we can make to people. One is, I exist as a conscious person. I am a conscious being. How do I know I exist? Well, because I feel, I see stuff, I experience stuff. So there is a quality to my experience. There is something that it feels like, and this is the kind of language that the philosophers use, there is something that it feels like to exist. That it's not just, we're not a zombie, a robot, a machine that simply might be able to sense and process information about the world. But we actually experience it as a felt experience. Can't get away from this word experience in describing these things. There is something that it is like to feel I exist, to experience my consciousness. And I am the subject of my experiences, meaning I am the person who is doing the thinking, the feeling, that I see, I feel, I hear. You know, it's I. There is an I that is doing this. So consciousness is subjective. There is a subject at the heart of it. And the subject is experiencing all the objects in the world and in our head. And I am the witness, the observer of my actions and my thoughts. And I am the same witness throughout my life. That's that famous verse in the Gita, Deyanosminyata Dehe Kumaram Yovanangjara. Incredible little verse. You know? It's talking about the fact that I, when I was a little kid, grown up, older, remain the same I. I never change. Consciousness does not change even though the body is changing, the mind is changing, the personality may change, everything may change, everything that you can think of can change. It all goes through this creation, maintenance and destruction. But the I doesn't. Consciousness doesn't change through all of that. The entity that is able to have those experiences doesn't change. And that is the key point, if we can put across to others. That what we're talking about in consciousness is that thing which does not change. Me as the subject, as the experiencer, as the witness, as the observer, as the seer, as the knower. That never changes. Actually, and what the Gita is suggesting is, you have no reason to suppose it ever will change. Just because you're linked to a body now and you know the body is going to collapse and die, of course, then there'll be a natural fear. But actually, you have no evidence that the I will ever stop. It will just keep on going in a new situation. Now, we'll work on that one in a bit more. So, these particular items have actually been taken up by other philosophers in their own way. They have managed to observe this. One of them is Professor John Searle, who is actually a materialist. He said a lot of very silly things. But again, he came up with something rather good and useful, and one which we can use. And that is that he said, when we're talking about consciousness, you can't just be talking about information processing. You can't just be talking about psychology. You can't just be talking about personality or, these type of externals. You've got to talk about the real thing. And he gave a phrase. He said, any theory about consciousness has to account for unified, qualitative subjectivity. I'll explain a couple of those, and the third one's next week. Unified, there's one of me. I am the I. It's not a we in here. I experience myself as a singular, unified being. I have lots of different opinions and thoughts and contrary notions. I may even have multiple personality disorder. But it's still the one person having those multiple personalities, isn't it? It's still unified. So there is the one I of me. And it is subjective. I am the subject. I am the thing that is having the experiences. And what I'm experiencing has qualities. And that's where we're going to go next week. We're going to enter the world of qualitative experience. And this brings in what I regard as the most important word for the Bhaktivedanta Institute, apart from Krishna, is qualia. Qualia. We will discuss qualia in 2 weeks' time. Consciousness is the Achilles heel of the physicalist notion and propaganda. Consciousness is. That's why Prabhupada wanted us to hit it hard. Why Prabhupada gets at it in the purports. And next week you will understand the killer argument against physicalist ideas. It's all wrapped up in this little word, qualia. So that's something to look forward to in 2 weeks' time. All right, so little takeaways, and if there's any time we could just have a couple of quick questions. Consciousness is real. It's the most real thing that you know. It's the only thing that you can really be sure of, that you are a conscious being. Everything else is additional. And basically what we gave in these other things, we call them pre-philosophical insights or axioms. This is the foundation. If we're going to discuss philosophy, we discuss from this point, I exist, I'm the experiencer, I am the I. These things we know for certain. You don't need to prove them by science. In fact, you cannot prove it by science. You cannot even prove it by philosophy. You just know these are the things. All we're doing is just bringing out what you actually intuitively already know to be true. So it's a great foundation. And if anyone says, oh, I don't know if I agree with them, we say, can you come up with anything better as a foundation? Is there any other axioms that you think are more foundational than these? No. I exist, I'm the subject, I'm the witness, I'm the perpetual witness. I, continue. And I like to bring in the last one in that Jiva Goswami says, when we, the incompatibility of our suffering. I aspire for pleasure. We know that actually, if we really look at it, what are we here for? What is it all about? I aspire for pleasure. Consciousness is the most important thing to us. We're not actually interested in anything else other than ourselves and what we experience. You know? Really, we're selfish, terrible beings. So, since that's what everyone wants to know about, it would be worth really understanding what actually makes you happy as a conscious being. And that's what the Happy Society of Krishna Consciousness is all about. All right, so consciousness is real. It's my sense of existence and ability for experience. And these 4 axioms kind of give us a working definition. There's no definition of consciousness, because the philosophers and the scientists would only want a physicalist one that explains consciousness, and there isn't. So there isn't a definition as such. But I think these axioms help us. And we heard John Searle's challenge that any theory of consciousness has to account for unified, qualitative subjectivity. And to this date, none has. And we'll hear why that is next time. Okay, Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. I don't know if we have time for any quick clarifications.
Yes, let us just answer these questions that came in online. And then if you have questions, we can discuss later on. Prabhu will still be here for breakfast. So we have one question from Keshav Madhava Prabhu. He says, Dear Akandadhi Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances, Jai Srila Prabhupada. Thank you for your presentation. The arguments in the purport point to the ability to conclude by the power of intelligence that there is a difference between body and self. At the same time, it is an abstract understanding and not an actual seeing of the self. By seeing, I mean internal perception through the mind. Someone may argue that therefore the existence of an individual, transcendental soul that is conscious is not proven by that. This person may argue that this type of contemplation is just the faculty of the mind to have meta-perceptions. I can think about my thinking. What would you respond to that?
Very good point. And I think he summarized what is often the challenge. That if we are saying that the mind can be confused and misled, then maybe we're also misled about our intuitions. But they've got to be the starting point. How can you start with anything other than your deepest intuitions about your existence? Because in order to say, well, your intuitions may be wrong, okay, what are you going to put in their place? You've got to start with the intuitions. And maybe there are processes, and I know that when we analyze exactly what some neuroscience gets up to, they cannot find anything that justifies these intuitions. Therefore, they say consciousness cannot exist, or it must be an illusion. Not because they've proved it, but because they cannot find anything that substantiates the intuitions from the brain. But what we're saying is, since these intuitions are common, universal, foundational, you have to start from that point and address them. And any explanation of illusion has to explain why we have those intuitions. And rather what we would like to do is say, well, maybe these intuitions are real. Wow, isn't that a kind of revolutionary idea? That maybe these deep intuitions that we all share, which actually make logical sense, maybe they're real. And maybe I should undergo a process by which I can actually directly perceive those. So this is the beginning. We've established justification for our faith that consciousness is real, consciousness is distinct from material functions. Now let us engage in the process of bhakti, of yoga, by which we can have direct perception of the self and of Krishna. Does that help to address that point? I don't know, maybe just one little question. You always have a question. You had Johanna. We'll do a quick one.
Thank you very much for your kindness. Because I was thinking of consciousness a few days ago and the nuanced understanding of consciousness. And if you could maybe just to repeat the Sanskrit term that Jiva Goswami uses for consciousness, that was something I was thinking about. What terminology he uses, because it would be interesting. Because consciousness, so to speak, is a symptom of the soul. And it manifests through the body, whether material or... but somehow it seems that when Jiva Goswami talks about the consciousness being the witness, I'm just trying to understand, because it seems like we are personifying consciousness itself.
We are personifying, because you cannot separate consciousness, which is giving us the power of experience. So by giving us the power of experience, it's actually creating us. That's the Descartes thing. That it's this cogito ergo sum is considered to be a perfect proposition, because the conclusion sum is contained within its premise, cogito. You cannot separate I am, the I and the am. You know? Many Western languages do. Many other languages put them together, as Latin does. You know, that it's one thing. I am is one concept. Cannot be separated. If I am, then I must be I am. You know, and what makes me the existing is that I am the knower. Now, in human beings, we have the ability to do this self-identification that Prabhupada talks about, to actually recognize I am the knower. In other embodied states, particularly the animal world, they will be conscious, but not necessarily self-reflectively conscious. They will not be able to recognize I am the witness and the observer in my body. They're just observing, right? And most humans are just going through their life observing. You know, we are conscious beings living unconsciously. You know, we're always conscious. We're conscious of stuff, but we're unconsciously conscious of the stuff. This is our thing. That's why Prabhupada said, you know, Krishna consciousness, first become conscious. You know, wake up in terms of what you're understanding. So, Jiva Goswami uses lots of different words for like the Sakshi as the witness, the Gya as the knower, and so on. And we're going to look at some of the qualities and functions of consciousness. We're taking all this bit by bit. Right now, even if we just understand, this is a really important point, I am. I exist. Wow, that makes me conscious. And I'm conscious because I exist. You know? Wow. Great point to start with, people.
I just have a question to the form direction that Prabhupada used.
Oh, yes.
Kind of form direction, what does it mean? The word Prabhupada used in the lecture.
Yeah, I think it's a lovely phrase, the form direction. This means that this is the form of Krishna that Krishna is taking in order to be with us in our sojourn, on our journey through the material world, and to help give direction to us. And actually the relationship with the Paramatma is very deep. Paramatma is doing everything to provide every experience for us. All we're doing is just Prabhupada's, it may be in the second half of this. Yeah. Individual is completely dependent on the direction of the super self, because in every step the individual self follows the direction of the super self in the matter of seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling, willing, everything. So that's Krishna with us, providing everything we experience. We better stop. But thank you very much. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam, Grantharaj ki jai.
Scientific Saturdays ki jai. His Grace Akandadhi Prabhu ki jai. Yes. Just a little